there. Welcome to the More Miles podcast. I'm Lauren.
Hi, Michelle.
I'm Scott.
And we are the More Miles Run Coaching team. Okay, so we are here at the end of November, and our topic for today, this is just the three of us. We don't have a guest today. It's just coaches corner. I don't know. We are talking about the off season and what that is, what it entails, what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and all things about the off season and recovery. So that is exactly where we're going to start. Michelle, can you tell us what is an off season when it comes to running, the sport of running?
Yes, the off season lies between your goal race or your A race and the start of your next training block. So you build up towards your goal race throughout your training season, and you could have other supporting races, but that goal race is where you give your full effort. And afterwards, you're spent. You've used everything you have. You left everything on the course. And so for that reason, you need to spend some time recouping, recovering, refueling yourself and letting yourself rest and repair. And you kind of have that period of recovery. It's a progressive recovery. You usually stop running for a week or so, and we'll get into that later, and then kind of slowly build back into your next training block.
So with that in mind, so we're looking at an off season as after your A race, after your goal race for the season. What's the importance of choosing? We've in other podcasts, we've talked about your A race or your goal race. What's the importance of choosing just one event that you are putting your primary focus on in a given training season?
Yeah, so you're progressively building during your training to that single race. It's not really, you can have some supporting races along the way. You can still have some other PRs at usually shorter distance races along the track to your big race. But like we said, you've built up to this one point. You have your top fitness right there. It's not sustainable. Your body can hold that. And when you've given it all in that single day, it's so important. You need to recover. You can't sustain that max effort, that max intensity, that max mileage forever without breaking down at some point. So we pick one single race to build to, and that allows us as coaches to program training specific to that race versus several different things where they're conflicting, and you're building all that fitness to that single goal. And like we said, there's supporting races. You can strategically place other races that you can excel at that are going to help you get to that goal.
So Michelle, what would happen? I'm going to give you a scenario, right? Goal race, train for it, plan for it. It does not go as planned, right? So now I'm stuck with an off season. So what do you do when your goal race goes out the window, or just is not good?
So, I mean, it depends. I guess I'm going to sit dark because we always say that. It depends. If you gave maximal effort at that race and it did not go as planned, you just kind of need to continue into that off season and pick a new A race for the next season and figure out where you want to go after that. Kind of analyze. Off season's a great time to sit back and learn. I like to reflect after my goal races and think about, there's always something I could have done better. There's always some different tactic I could have done. Talk it over with your coach about what worked and what didn't, so that your training for the next race can be tailored to you, and you can make sure we take everything into account with your training for the next A race. If your A race didn't go to plan and it was like a weather condition or a GI issue or something else, and you didn't give that full effort, there's a lot of options, and that's something you need to talk about with your coach. I guess we can kind of tie this into Lauren, what you think about redemption races and how to plan that in.
I think this is huge. It is a big topic when we're talking about the off season. We're talking about recovery. This is a really difficult period for a lot of runners. We are really driven people. So I think, like Michelle said, the importance of choosing an A race is that you are building with specificity up toward your maximal fitness. We're trying to get you as prepared as possible, as fit, as trained as possible for that goal race. There's a lot of work that goes into that. Now, it is really, really common that you get to that goal race and it goes really well and you are really fit and you are really motivated now to do more because you just like nailed it. You feel really great. You want to go harder. You want to see the next thing. Or it doesn't go well and you want redemption. You want to try again. So there's no best answer of yes, can I go get should I go to a redemption race. A redemption race is essentially within the same season, so we're talking about you've already done all of this training, you've built all of this fitness, and your A race didn't go to plan, so in the same season, maybe we're talking about a couple weeks later, you want to go try again. I think that really depends on how the race itself went. I think, like Michelle said, I completely agree. If you gave a maximal effort and just didn't reach the time goal that you wanted, it's time to recover. You put in that whole training block plus a maximal effort toward that race, even if the result wasn't what you wanted on that single day. You've got to honor your body and give that recovery. You can't sustain that peak fitness indefinitely. Peak fitness is not a perpetual state. It's a flow. You build up, you recover, you build up again, you recover, you build up again, but you can only reach those next highest peaks if you're taking that recovery time. Strength, growth, improvement, speed, it's all built on stress plus rest. You can't get better at anything, at your endurance, at your speed, at your strength, if you don't include the rest, if you are only putting in the stress. So that's the key there. Now, like Michelle said, I would agree. There are some cases where you go to your goal race and for whatever reason, you don't exert your maximal effort. Common things we see are like you have GI issues and you're throwing up halfway through the race. And so you either don't finish, in which case, you didn't give your maximal effort in that event, or you had to slow way down in order to finish. So, you completed the distance, but the effort that you invested was a lot lower. In those kind of cases, I think it's reasonable to discuss a redemption race. But again, I feel like those are rare. I feel like it is most common that you've put in a big, big effort, even if you didn't achieve the goal, and you need to honor your body and give it the recovery so that you can gain from that fitness that you've been building and apply it to the next training block. So lean on your coach when you have those questions and you're not sure. But I would say the cases that it's a good idea to go do a redemption race are few. And even when it is a good idea, it's always a risk. I kind of always make sure to tell people that going and doing another race is not a guarantee. In fact, there's probably a lesser chance of hitting your goal than there was the first time when you were trained, tapered, and it was, kind of neat and packaged nicely. So yeah, recovery is key to increasing your fitness across multiple training blocks, across multiple years. That's how we ultimately reach your best potential, is the long term. And that requires the stress plus rest equation. So yeah. So
I know it's
oh, go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was just going to ask Scott, like, you have this down period from peak fitness into recovery. How long should you take to recover before you start building again?
Yeah, I would say if let's break this down in between with the distance of your goal race, right? So if you're talking half marathon and above, even upwards of ultra marathons, 5 days a week, right? Typical in terms of no running, right? So let's break that down as well, right? Rest does not mean nothing at all, right? So there's benefits to walking. You can do some yoga, you can do some other light activities. But in terms of the pure active running, 5 days to a week, half marathon and above. Now, if you're running a goal race that's, let's say, 5K, 10K, or something shorter than that, you don't necessarily need a full week of recovery, right? You could maybe need a day or up to 3 days or so. The other thing to keep in mind with all this too is the intensity, right, in which you've exerted in said goal race, right? And then other factors too. I mean, as you're getting upwards into ultra marathons, there's things that are going to happen to your body, right? Physically, mentally, right? That's going to require, that time off, right? And that's when you can work with your coach to say, hey, XYZ happened in my goal race, right? I may need more than 5 days, right? Or it could be the reverse, right? Somebody could come and feel fantastic, and I'm not that sore. I feel pretty good. I don't need, a week off. But I think in terms of just talking about it in terms of just the suggestions, kind of rule of thumb, is that week for half marathon and above, and we could go into a lot of details about why, right? Why does your body need 5 days to a week to recover, right? And I'll throw that back at
So
you all.
yeah, I wanted to touch on that because one of the things that you mentioned, and I think we hear this really often, is you've put in, this big effort, you've done a big thing, and the next day you're not sore, you're
Mhm.
not tired, so you want to go run. We hear that really, really often. But there are some reasons aside from muscle soreness that it is best practice not to run. I know, again, we are driven people and running is our preferred form of locomotion. So like I understand that it is very difficult to take a complete running break. So I really want to emphasize there what Scott said, that in that short term recovery window, when right after your goal race, we recommend a week of running rest. But that doesn't mean sitting on the sofa for an entire week. Motion is lotion is the popular phrase. That walking is great for you, strength training is great for you, swimming, cycling, yoga. Like move your body. That's really important. But it's also really important to take a break from the high intensity and the impact that running puts on your body. And that's not so much just the muscle soreness. Yes, your muscles have been damaged both from the race itself and from the training block that you invested putting into the race. So, yes, your muscles need to heal and recover. They've been physically damaged. And in order for them to improve and again move forward productively into the next season, you need that recovery. But that's not the only thing at play here. Your hormones are going to be thrown out of whack when you've put in a high intensity effort. And that's not necessarily something that you feel right away the next day. Sometimes it is. Often, Scott, we see this in ultras. You
Mhm.
can't sleep that night. Your body is hot and
Mhm.
achy and sore. Those are obvious signs. Someone who's doing a marathon, a half marathon, you're probably going to be sore, but there's also some other things happening underneath the surface there that you're maybe not necessarily aware of for 48 hours, 72 hours later. And it is really important for your hormonal health, for your systemic health, to give your body that chance to calm, settle, and recover systemically, not just your muscles and your muscle soreness. So I think that's a key point that sometimes people miss when they don't want to take complete running rest. Um, yeah, so that was a good question. What about Scott, the extended period? So if we're looking at that immediate week, give or take,
Mhm.
after your goal race, then what? Do we just like jump back into training right after that week off, or what does an off season really look like?
Mhm. Yeah, so we're going to slowly build back up, right? So w- typically, just take a look at where the athlete was at before that week break, right? If we're talking in terms of jumping right back into it, we're going to slowly build you back up, right? It's kind of like that ladder. If you're running X amount of, let's say, 40 miles a week, right? You take a little time off, right? We're not going to jump up to 50 right when you come back, right? We're going to slowly build you up. Now, the goal is that once you start your next cycle, right, you're going to be back and ready to go and ready to put in some intensity. But it's going to be low intensity, right? Once you come off of that 5 days to a week break, low intensity, you're going to build back, right? And it's also a time really to kind of assess, where you're at. What's your weaknesses, right? It's a good time to kind of evaluate what is it that you need to focus on. And I think coming back slowly, right? No, if nothing else from an intensity standpoint, you can kind of sit back and kind of assess, okay, what is it that I need to work on, right? Is it my hill climbing? Is it my strength? Is it something else, right? So I think just to answer your question, I think no, you don't want to just jump right back in to where you were from the prior cycle, because you're coming off of a lot of intensity towards the end as you're heading into your goal race. You want to come back in slowly, but you want to come back with low intensity. I think that's kind of the two things I would say.
So how long do
Mhm.
we want to be recovering? Like how do we know we're talking about an
Yep.
off season. How do we know how long that off season is going to be?
It depends on when your next goal race is, right? So if you look at it in terms of when is your next goal race, right? And have that conversation and say, okay, we're in November right now. Are you looking at a spring race, spring marathon? Are you looking at it next fall, right? So everybody's goals are going to be a little bit different. So for somebody that says, hey, I want to jump right back in and I want to take advantage of running a spring marathon, let's say, and they just had a goal race in November, it's going to look a little bit different if somebody says, hey, you know what, I want to do this same race in November next year. So that's a year off, right? So I guess to answer that question, it really depends on that athlete's next goal, right? We can, and that's, look at it from a season perspective, right? You can almost look at it on a calendar, right? 12 months in a year. How does that play into your needs, right, for your next race? And then we can go from there in terms of how long does that need to be? How long does that kind of off season need to be? So
I think that's an important point that, especially people who are a little bit newer to the sport, maybe don't realize that running is a seasonal sport. That we have, if you follow us on social media, I talk a lot about it's racing season. We
mhm.
are in racing season. What does that mean? So I think that that's helpful for people to understand that the sport of running in general, recreationally for adults, is primarily a fall sport in terms of
Mhm.
racing and a spring sport in terms of racing. Now, that doesn't mean that's where all your training is happening. If you are training for a fall race, or yes, if you're training for a fall race, we are typically training through the summer. If you are training for a spring race, we're typically training through the winter. And then your off season is going to be those periods in between. So, like Scott mentioned, in terms of determining how long it is, it can be really, or how long your off season is, it's really helpful to plan your calendar in advance. That you're not just kind of winging it and flying from race to race as you see something on Facebook that looks appealing to you. So, what might be,
Mhm.
Michelle, a good way to structure a calendar if you're looking at when to plan your goal races? Are there like a particular window from your last race to your next race that you want to be looking at? Does that matter?
I think it does, especially depending on the distance. So, like, the longer the distance, I think the more time you might need between the two races. So, I wouldn't say more than, like, ideally. I know I'm going to say this, give some ranges, but I know there's people who can do more than this or less than this. And this is, again, talk to your coach. But typically, like a marathon or an ultra in a season and no more than that. It would be like recommended because that's going to give your body the time to recover and then rebuild for the next season. The shorter the distance, the more frequent you can schedule them into your calendar. Like you could probably do a 10K every few months, a goal 10K, and recover well and build for the next one. But I think when you're planning at a macro level on a calendar, and I personally do this at the start of every new year, I plan looking at the calendar. I try to plan goal races that will align with what I know I can handle in my training. So, like if it's a marathon, do I have the time in the month before this for like a 3 hour long run? Realistically, with my life schedule, with what work will probably look like, with what my kids will probably have going on. So looking at it at a macro level, I think bird's eye view of the year first, saying like this is a time where I know I'm not going to have to train properly, with recovery, with sleep, with everything else, and then choosing races that fit into your life is going to be the most successful way to plan that versus, um, you know, picking this cool race that looks amazing, but is it an opportune time for you?
Uh,
That makes
Michelle,
sense.
yeah, absolutely. One thing I would add from a calendar perspective, I'm a big calendar person too. At the beginning of the year, right, get that calendar out and look at it,
Mm-hmm.
put some dates in there. And I think this might have been in episode 3 or 4 that we did. We talked about how long is a cycle, like a training cycle, and okay, if you're doing an ultra, you're talking about up to 20 weeks. I
Right.
like to advise reverse engineering and looking at the goal race, that date, and working backwards,
Working
right?
backwards.
So if you're looking at a May marathon, for example, how long is that training cycle going to be? Let's throw out 16 weeks or 4 months, working in
Mm-hmm.
reverse. And then you can say, okay, now we're in the beginning of February. Off season, right? Boom, is from
Right.
end of goal race now in the fall to February, right? So I think if people like it in terms of like the calendar, which I do, that's another way to look at it. Just work backwards.
Yeah, and just keeping in mind, like a marathon is typically a 16 to 20
Mhm.
week training cycle, depending on your fitness level and whether you've done one before and where you are now. Ultra, I mean, I don't know, you guys are the ultra coaches. I'm sure it's longer, but like,
So,
and then there's half marathon. I mean, typically it's 12 to 16 weeks for a half marathon. So you have a pretty big window that you need to plan into your training schedule. Like when you're looking at races, you've got to block out, like, here's 4 weeks where or 4 months, that you need to be focusing on this effort and being able to give what you have into that. There's something else I was going to say. Now I've lost it, but
but
like
let's,
planning
yeah.
but planning that is like, you need to think of it not as a race on a calendar, but a block of time that you're plotting down. And if you're planning an early spring race, keep in mind, if you've run a late fall race and then you have an early spring race, like a March race, your off season might be 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's it. You're going to recover and you're going to start building again. So that's something else to keep in mind when you plan your races, is when you have a late season and an early season, you're shortening that recovery time.
I think that's a good place just to lean on your coach. Again, if you're not sure, your coach can help you figure out for you what the ideal recovery time is and what the ideal build time is for your next training cycle, because all of these numbers that we're throwing out are ideals, and they're highly variable to the individual. They're highly variable to how long you've been training, your personal fitness level, and also how well your coach knows you. Like, the longer that you've been working with a coach, the better they know, okay, an 8-week specific buildup is best for this person. A 12-week becomes too long. They become too overwhelmed, too fatigued. Or, vice versa. This person has been completely off of running for 4 months, 5 months. So we need to take a longer stretch of time to rebuild their base before the goal. So if you're not sure about race scheduling, and if you're scheduling things too close or too far apart, lean on your coach here. And this is really where having that expert opinion outside of your excitement about all of the races that keep popping up in front of you, they can kind of help you sort through which ones are going to be ideal from a training perspective. And then you can work together on which ones are going to be best for your life, your schedule, and kind of work it down that way, and choose events that way. Scott, I feel like you were trying to say something and cut you off. Sorry.
No. My brain was just working towards, and I think you just covered it right there, is in terms of, somebody that picks their next goal race, right? Let's say I just got off doing an ultra or a marathon in the fall, but they really want to do, a marathon, let's say in March. And to my prior point of reverse engineering and looking at those weeks, that may not add up. That math may not add up. You may not have 16 to 20 weeks, right, to get ready for that March. So therefore, you have to look at it as, your off season may be really condensed, right? And it may blend into that training cycle for that next marathon. So they may sort of blend in together. But that's where my brain was working with that one.
So that's a great point. I think to elaborate on that a little bit, the way that we engineer and structure that then is when you do have races that are a little bit closer together, and that's okay. I want to emphasize that. Like, if there's a race that you have really been wanting to do, and that's the way it works, that you have a late season race followed by an early season race, that's okay. We can make that work. And again, that's the benefit of working with a coach, is understanding and knowing how to make that work in the way that is productive for you. But one of the ways that we do that is the recovery block that we're talking about right now is primo important. The thing that will change here, if you do have races that are pretty close back to back, is your base training phase. This recovery block that we're talking about is necessary. I'm going to say that for every athlete, it is necessary. But you need less of the base building when you've taken a shorter recovery block. So we can sort of go from recovery into specific training for the next thing if they're close together. Now, if they're far apart, we're looking at the opposite, where that recovery block is super important. And then we're taking a little bit long of a base training phase. And that can be a real benefit to you. This is where we can really build your endurance, especially if you are looking at long form racing like marathon and upward. A long base training cycle can be a huge benefit toward building your total volume of mileage, and really building your endurance. So there's benefits of both, and both can work. So just to make that clear for listeners, that we're not not saying you need exactly this block of time every time. But
Mhm.
again, that's where a coach is so helpful to helping you figure out how to make that work for you. Yeah, sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there.
It's an important
So
tangent.
yeah, yeah. um, it's funny. Before we got on the call, I was kind of saying we have a list of topics that we wanted to cover, and I feel like we've sort of naturally covered a lot of them from different sections of our list. But I want to make sure that we are covering everything that we wanted to cover. So let's talk about, in your off season, we are saying it is best practice to take a period with no running, other forms of motion being okay. It is best practice to take a period of time of low running, low intensity, where we're decreasing everything. What should we be doing during the off season if running is becoming a smaller portion of our day? What the heck do we do with our time? Scott, why don't I throw that to you for one of the things we've talked about a lot recently is balance, and
Mhm.
how the off season can help you with balance in some other areas of your life.
Yep. It's perfect time to start prioritizing things that maybe you should prioritize or that are going to really help you. Sleep is one. I think it's very easy in a training cycle with life, with everything that everybody has going on, to not get enough sleep. And I think if you focus on your sleep and not just saying, I'm just going to get 7, 8 hours of sleep because that's what they say I should get, it's making sure that you get into a good routine, right? So that those habits can continue on and on and on. Making sure you get to bed at a certain time, right? Making sure you get the right amount. And it's not just because you just need that sleep. Why do you need it? I mean, your body is going to build itself while you're sleeping. Not just recovering, but it's going to build it's going to get stronger, if you get that good sleep. So there's obviously the benefits to it. Focus on that. That's a quick. I personally think it's a quick hit. It's not easy. I don't get enough sleep myself. It's really tough with work, with family, all the competing priorities. But if you prioritize it, right, and look at sleep, just using this as an example, as more important than, let's say, that show that you want to watch, right? That movie, or scrolling in your phone, and that's probably very unpopular because everybody loves those things. But if you prioritize it and it becomes a habit, you're gonna reap some benefits off of that for sure. So I'd say sleep, one. Two, and I don't know if this is where we're going with this, but I think focusing on some of your weaknesses like strength work, right, in the off season, because when you're doing some high intensity in a cycle, you're probably coming down. You're not doing as much intensity from a strength perspective, if at all. So it's a good time to get some solid strength work in. And I'll kind of stop there because I think those two things, sleep and strength, right, two things that you can focus on in the off season. Um, yeah, I think that's what I would say in terms of some things to focus on. But again, balancing that within, you know, the constraints of your life and your schedule and all of that, is something that I think everybody has to kind of look at, carve into their life, um, put a focus on it, and make it a priority.
So from the strength side, I'm going to try not to go off on too much of a tangent here. Spoiler alert, our
Hmm.
next episode is actually going to take a deep dive into strength training. So I'll try to kind of keep this on the surface and save a lot of it for our next episode, which will also have a special guest. It's not just with us. But off season is gains season. When we're talking about strength, we're talking about the gym. Strength training is really, really important for endurance athletes. We do a sport that is thousands, hundreds of thousands of repetitions in the same plane of motion. Even if you're trail running, you get a little bit more variety in your plane of motion, but for the most part, it is a highly, highly repetitive sport. And strength is key to keeping your body healthy. Not only, I think most people know we should be doing strength for injury prevention. I think a lot of people don't know how important strength is to good form and to endurance, to having the strength to hold on to your form when you are hours into a race. That is strength. It's not endurance. You've got so many assister muscles that are holding your body up that need to have the strength to support the weight of your body plus gravity plus momentum every time that you land on the ground. So I want to really emphasize that strength is super important for endurance athletes. And again, we'll get more into why in our next episode. But when you are in a training season, strength is still important, but you are doing a high volume of running training and typically a high variety of running training. So you're not just running easy miles every day. You're getting speed work, you're getting hill work, you're moving your stride in different ways. And you're exerting a lot of energy into your run training. So it is normal and natural that your strength training is going to be a little bit lower, a little bit lighter during your heavy run training season. And that's necessary. You only have so much energy, so many hours in the day. It's important that it doesn't go away entirely, that we are maintaining your strength, maintaining your mobility. But it's normal and natural that running takes the focus and strength training is going to take a back seat. In the off season, we need to reverse that. You need to put the extra time, effort, energy into your strength training so that we can build the muscle. And I don't even necessarily mean like building muscle mass, but building your strength that has been neglected during your training season so that you have, again, that strength and support to maintain your form, maintain your speed, build your endurance, so that when you begin your training cycle again, you can afford to put training on the back seat. You can only maintain that balance healthily if you've put the extra effort into strength training in the off season. So a little bit more time and a little bit more energy needs to go into your strength training. We also might change a little bit the way that you're doing your strength training. So off season is a good time to be lifting heavy. Again, just because of the energy cost and the stress cost on your body, you have room for that energy and stress cost on your body in the off season, whereas in the height of your training season, you maybe don't. So strength training, lifting heavy in your strength training during the off season is super important. I think that kind of transitions us well, though, also into nutrition. And again, it's sort of in the way that strength training is periodized to your run training and needs to ebb and flow with your run training, your nutrition does too. So let's make sure we touch on that both in the short term and the long term. Michelle, let's back that up a little bit. When it comes to nutrition, and let's say that week, so we're talking about the off season kind of in two portions. You've got that first week of recovery right after your A race. Let's start there. What should your nutrition be looking like during your rest week?
That rest week, you just need to eat. Like, just eat. We've talked about this in other podcast episodes, but typically a lot of people are not hungry the day of their race, which is normal. It's hard to get protein in. We've talked about recovery needs for protein. So especially the day following your race and the rest of that week, do not track calories. Don't stress about anything. Just incorporate a ton of protein with each meal, each snack. That way you are going to get enough, as long as you're including that in there. Replace your carbs. Your glycogen stores are trashed. They're done. You've used it all up, and that's what you had stored them to do. That's the intent. You used them up, but you've got to replenish them. Your body still needs to have them on hand. So eat a lot of carbs, a lot of protein. You're going to get fat with it, so you don't have to worry about getting a certain amount of fat. It just kind of comes with the territory. But just eat until you're full. Like, you're going to be hungry. You're going to be hungrier than normal, and that's normal. You're going to be thirstier than normal. The first few days, still taking electrolytes. You're still rebalancing everything. So make sure you're taking in sports drinks, even though you're not running. And just, enjoy the week of not stressing. A lot of people dial their nutrition in, and that's a stressor on your body, is thinking about nutrition 24/7. When you're in the heat of training, you're making sure you have your pre-run fuel, your in-run fuel, your post-run fuel. What are you eating the rest of the day? And that's just as mentally challenging as running itself. So taking that week, even 2 weeks off to just eat, relax, and enjoy your food without thinking about how it's fueling you or not fueling you and just recover, I think is super important, because that mental side of it is equally as important as recovering the physical side. You need the time off mentally to just relax. Have that post race beer and don't worry about it. Have some Pop-Tarts if that's what your thing is, enjoy it. Have a whole pizza to yourself. Who cares? Just take it in, because you do need it and your body does need it, the fuel to recover. So that's the short term. And then you have, the off season and base training is where I think people get, and myself included, I will admit, this is where it gets tough. Is after those 2 weeks, your appetite is still going to be high. You've spent 4 to 6 months training and running and eating a ton of calories, a lot of fuel, and now you're backed off. But your appetite isn't going to take a lot longer to come back down. And that's okay. It will come back down. It'll start to, you're going to hit equilibrium again. So in that time, you're going to gain weight. Everyone gains a few pounds, but you don't want that to get out of control. Like if your clothes stop fitting, you might need to reevaluate what you've been eating through the day. But focusing on nutrient dense foods versus high carb. So where, when we have ultra and marathon training and even half marathon training, we're saying eat, graham crackers before your run, have some gummy bears, take in juice before your run if you can't eat. We're going to back that stuff off. You're going to kind of focus more on vegetables, fruits, lean proteins, yogurt, like the high protein, nutrient dense foods are going to take priority over the high carb foods, and especially the fast carb foods. So those fast carb foods are super important when you're training, even more important that peak week into race day. But once you've hit race day and you've restored the glycogen stores, you really do need to back off those, focusing more on the nutrients that you get in, not necessarily tracking your calories unless that is beneficial to you to keep things in check. And then just kind of keeping an eye, and your weight will gradually come back to where it should be, to your healthy body weight, if you're following that strategy. Especially as your running starts to gradually increase, it'll kind of meet it, your appetite will come down, your racing will increase. Not your racing, your running will increase, and then everything will kind of go back to normal. And you'll probably start to feel better, but that's all completely normal to feel that way. Still feel hungry. I would say even for me, it's a month after race day, I'm still pretty hungry and have to start dialing things in a little bit.
Yeah, I think, Michelle, that helps me tremendously, and I think there's many out there that kind of are somewhat like me that honestly looks at the fueling part of things. I don't want to say obsess about it, right? But I do take it pretty seriously in terms of, am I taking enough electrolytes, while I'm training? Am I fueling at the right times, et cetera? And it's hard sometimes to really know, am I taking in the right things in the off season, doing the right things? I think, to sum up what I'm trying to say here, is when you said nutrient dense foods, like that clicked for me, right? As much as I know what I should be eating, sometimes it's hard to be like, is this really nutrient dense, right? But I think that resonates for me, and hopefully it does for others, just that phrase nutrient dense, right? But also, the timeline that you gave, I think that's super, super important.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's helpful is like when you're in that off season and even base training, you're focusing on whole foods, like some single ingredient fuels. Like you have, chicken, you have beef, you have a strawberry, you have salad, like single ingredient whole foods are going to be your focus, where we do start to incorporate more packaged processed foods that you don't need for a healthy lifestyle on a day-to-day basis. Those packaged foods are kind of going away. You're not going to touch your gels. You're probably not going to touch them for a while. They're going to sit in your pantry until the next build. You're not going to probably need the Pop-Tarts or cereal or any of that stuff either. But those things are important, just not now. So, a good way to look at it is, if this is a single ingredient food, I should be eating it in my off season. If it's packaged, just sparingly, let's back off it a little bit. Not that you can't have it, just be aware that where those carbs are the primary focus later in season, they kind of take a back seat now.
When to turn it off and on, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think we have emphasized, if you've listened to our podcasts on nutrition, or if you haven't, go back and listen to them. They're all on YouTube and Spotify. We have sort of emphasized that in training, we do push a more processed food because it's lower in fiber, it's higher in carbs, it's higher in sugar. And we're trying to get as much carbohydrate into your system as we can for the massive amount of work that you are doing on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. But I think we've also emphasized this isn't necessarily what we recommend for a healthy lifestyle. And this is where that balance comes in. Like Michelle said, this is where you have the time, and it is best practice for your body to focus on whole foods, and things that are less processed, less packaged. If it doesn't even have a package, you're doing great. I think that's a good point. I wanted to also emphasize something else that you mentioned, because I think it's a big fear for a lot of people is weight gain. And I just want to touch on that some weight gain is natural, important, and healthy. That I think it's really common when you have trained for this big A race, you reach that A race in your peak physical condition, and a lot of people feel really darn good about how they look because you're in shape, man, right? Like, and we really want this to be a sustainable state. It's not. And I just want to emphasize that it's not a sustainable state. And even when you see that in media, like, we see bodybuilders and actors and stuff like that, it's not a sustainable state for them either. It is a peak that they're building toward, for a role or for a competition or whatever. That's not the state that they're sustaining. So it's important to know that softening is normal and it's healthy, because you can't, again, in that stress plus rest equation, you can't continue to build upward, and you can't sustain upward. You can't sustain peak. There has to be an ebb and a flow. So it's a good time to not step on the scale. It's a good time to, there's someone I follow on social media who talks about this, and she recommends having some clothes that you set aside for the off season that are maybe a size bigger than you're used to, so that you feel comfortable. Like, because it does sometimes happen, again, you don't want to get to the point that you feel bad in your skin, but it might happen that your clothes get a little bit tighter, and you don't want to walk around feeling bad about yourself because of that, when it's a natural and necessary part of a long-term training trajectory. So make sure you're choosing clothes that you feel comfortable in, and know that it's okay that the clothes that you wore on race day are maybe a little bit tight right now. But by the time you get to your next race day, you're going to be, popping out in the way that you want to. And I think sometimes people are ashamed to talk about the vanity side of it. And I just want to say, like, it is okay to feel really darn good about yourself when you're in really good shape. And it is also okay to expect that that's going to soften a little bit in the off season, that neither of those is a permanent state.
Yeah. And I think this is something I saw, I think it was last year. And I think it's important because there is a side, and this is a whole topic for another day, I think, but there is a whole, there's like this, and I think it's going away, thankfully, this idea of what a runner's body should be. Like, these peak shape elite runners that are long and lean. And first of all, they're genetically engineered to be that way, which, everyone's different. But I think it was Ryan Hall, who in the past few years, he was, very worried about his weight up to a point, and he had racing weight, which was ideal racing weight, and then let himself gain some weight and build strength. And he's actually heavier now than he's ever been, but stronger than he's ever been. And he's running faster. So I think it's a good point to almost evaluate if you find yourself obsessing about your weight and you're having trouble maintaining whatever you think this ideal weight is, maybe stepping back and saying, is this really? Because your body will try to find like a homeostasis. And if you're fighting it to stay at who knows how you came up with this number, but if you're trying to find a number on a scale that you think is going to make you run faster or look better, but your body isn't there, it might be time to reevaluate and step back and say, like, do I just need to readjust my nutrition and my workouts so that maybe I do need to be a little bit heavier to perform my best? Because skinnier does not always equate to faster or better performance or anything. So, and Ryan Hall really brought that to light last year, and I commend him for that. That was very interesting to read.
I think that reminds me of something. We actually touched on it a little bit before we started recording, when we were talking about this nutrition topic, and talking about, during that week or so after your A race, that you really should just eat and not worry about what it is, what kind of fuel it is, how it's just eat. Your body needs fuel. Oh my gosh, I completely just blanked on where I was going with.
So
We're in
as
JFK
as
cloud.
no, as you're blanking, I had a thought of, I'll give you like a real life example, even though I didn't run yesterday, but I've always looked
Oh,
at the if I've got an ultra, let's not even say goal race or A race, let's say an ultra, right? I know that I'm gonna be out there for a long time. I need fuel. I've never had an issue with consuming whatever I want. It doesn't matter what it is, pizza, beer, cake, it doesn't matter. For 24 to 48 hours after an ultra, it's after that that I'm like, oh no, I can't be doing this, right? And it's more mental, right? It's like, okay, I got to reel this back in because I'm gonna gain too much weight, and everybody's different, I think, in terms of why they feel they need to reel it in. For me, yes, it's the weight thing, yes, but it's more a habit. It's like I don't want that to spiral into 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, and now I'm still eating every single day like this because I know it's going to impact my performance. I look at the nutrition, the weight, yes, but I look at it in terms of fuel, gasoline for when I'm running. And I know that 24, 48 hours after an ultra, I can eat whatever I want. And that's fuel and gasoline. But I know to a certain point, 2 weeks later, that's really not helping me. So that's
yeah.
kind of where I feel that line. And I'm just using me as an example. So I have no problem gorging 24 to 48 hours. It's after that that I'm like, oh shoot, I need some help here.
Yeah.
That's where I was going. I'm glad you
So-
picked up on that, and I'm glad that it sparked my memory too. One of the things I wanted to touch on is if you feel like you have a difficult time allowing yourself to eat freely, and then rein it back in, like if you feel like you're having a hard time finding a healthy balance
Mhm.
and you are going to that extreme of eating whatever you want as much as you want, junk stuff because you just ran a race all of the time and that extends into a longer period of time, you feel like you're having that hard time reining yourself back in, that can be a sign that maybe you've been a little bit too restrictive during your training cycle, that you're kind of swinging to the opposite extreme. You've been diligent, restrictive, very focused for this however long it's been, 8, 10, 12, 16 weeks of time, and then you're swinging to the entire other extreme. So take that as information that in your next training cycle, that we need to be aware, making sure that you're getting enough, making
Mhm.
sure that you're not being too restrictive, or it might not even be an issue of restriction so much as focus, that you are hyper focused on making sure that your numbers are exactly right, or what have you. And you just need to completely swing to the opposite extreme of not being aware of yourself at all. So when you feel yourself swinging, take that as information, not even necessarily that what you're doing in the moment is wrong, but that maybe you were too far to the other extreme during your training. And so when we come back into the training cycle, we need to be aware of that piece of it too, so that we can take wild swings of extremes and bring it more back to a periodization of little ebbs and flows with your training. So, okay, I think we've covered most of it. The last thing I wanted to cover, we talked about a lot of things that you should be doing during your recovery cycle. Is there anything that you should definitely not do during your recovery cycle?
Race. Go out and try and race another race. High intensity.
Well,
Yeah.
let's define that a little bit, because
Yeah.
we kind of joked about this. We just came out of it locally here. The big race that we had was the JFK 50, just happened yesterday,
Mhm.
and it's the week before Thanksgiving. A lot of our athletes who just ran 50 miles are also going to go run a turkey trot on Thursday. So
Yeah.
define that a little bit more. When
Yeah.
we say don't race during your recovery period,
Yeah.
is there a place that it's okay to do some racing?
I mean, I looked at it more as, in that recovery period, it may be, this goes back to the redemption race thing, right? if something doesn't go your way in your goal race, it may be natural to feel like, okay, I got to jump right back on, start doing some intervals. You want to keep that intensity low, right? You should temper that, So, but I would say, if you're running an ultra, or your goal race was an ultra, right? In your recovery or off season, you shouldn't sign up and run and race a half marathon or a marathon at intensity for a specific goal, right? That's not a good idea. So when I say racing, I would look at it in two ways. I would say don't sign up for a fast race. Yeah, you can go out and run a turkey trot. That's okay. But and then also just reeling back the intensity. And I think it is natural if I'll say both ends. If an athlete has a great race, a goal race, and then they're like, I gotta take advantage of this. They may want mentally to be like, I got to take advantage of this fitness. I'm gonna race really quickly, right? So that's one trap, I think. But then conversely, there could be an athlete that did not perform well in their goal race, and they want to go right into another race. But I think we can talk to that like we did before about getting a shorter cycle, right, to get to a spring goal, right, a next goal race. For the terms of what we're talking about here, I think it's like you don't want to jump into next week or 2 weeks from now trying to bust out fast half marathon because you're
Great.
antsy. So
some short fun races.
yeah,
We're okay with it. Going to a race is not the
Mhm.
restriction so much as the effort and the intensity
Yeah,
that
there
you're
you go.
putting into it.
Yeah.
You
The
could like define
local
it between eventing
neighborhood.
and racing. Like you can go to an event, just don't try to make the podium necessarily. Just chill for a minute.
I like that.
Just
eventing versus
Venting.
racing. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that because I tend to say fun run, and that I don't like the way that sounds because when you're racing hard, it should also be fun.
Yeah.
So I like that. Going to an event versus racing an event are two different things.
Go participate.
Yeah.
Just
And again, lean on your coach. This is another place that your coach can help you define, okay, is a 10K too much? Can I go run the 1 mile and blow it up? Like, there's always exceptions here. There's always some variation to the individual or to the race. But again, this is where a coach can be really helpful in helping you figure out what is and isn't best for you. And in a lot of cases, holding you back from doing something that is not serving your best interest, is not going to make you better, is not going to help you grow and improve long term, or even just in the next season, in the next couple weeks. So lean on your coach for these kinds of things. Lean on your coach anyway. I was about to say if you're not sure, but talk to your coach either way before you go sign up for a race within a week, 2 weeks of your big goal race. Yeah. Okay, I think we covered this topic pretty well. And like I said, our next episode is going to expand a little bit upon this subject, but most specifically as it relates to strength training and what we can be doing, because a lot of athletes are in an off season right now, or they're very nearly about to be as we come into the end of the year here. So be sure to tune back in for our next episode coming out here soon. Okay, is there anything else that you guys would add?
I think we're good. We covered it.
Nothing else.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for tuning into the More Miles podcast. You can find us at moremilestogo.com is our website, where you can find information about what we do, who we are, and you can also find information about our podcast on the website. Then you can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And you can find us on social media at More Miles Run Coaching on Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube. Okay, I think I covered everything. All right, you guys have a good night. Thanks for joining me.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care.